Okay, so one of the people who had to adapt to these new COVID rules meetings was a Richmond School Board member, Kenya Gibson. Kenya was already well versed in promoting public observation of and participation in the work of the school board, but she wasn't always joined in her enthusiasm by her fellow board members. So I've asked Kenya to come here today to talk about what it takes to promote a culture of transparency within a public body. So
yeah,
Kenya?
Thanks so much. Excited to join this discussion today. A quick story, my quick story is I am a member of the school board. I was elected in a special election in 2017 due to redistricting, which caused kind of a ripple effect in elected officials as they moved up. I have 2 kids in the schools and got really involved in public education as a parent who was concerned when I heard about so much money being lost from the schools. And so I got really involved working with teachers and parents to advocate for more funding for the school. And my first venture into the world of FOIA was as a parent. Our mayor, who prior to the mayor, our current incumbent, had published a budget, and the budget document said that they were basically saying, look, we don't need to give that much money to build more schools because over the past 10 years we've invested in over $296 million in new school buildings. And so the number made me curious, and so I submitted a FOIA to say, okay, please let me know how that breaks down. What did you spend that money on? And then I was involved in a pretty intense match of FOIA ping pong. So I FOIA'd the city, and then the city took a lot of time and then told me over time, no, you need to ask the schools. But I knew that it wasn't a school thing. And then sure enough, the schools said, no, you need to ask the city. Through that match of ping pong, several months passed. And then I finally got a document that really didn't say that much, A, and B, what it did say was a lot less money than what it said in the budget. And so I think that was, my somewhat naive self was like, how could that be? How could I have not gotten this information? And how is it that those 2 numbers at the bottom line aren't the same? And I think that fueled some of my advocacy and interest in becoming a part of the process. So I ran and won an election, as I mentioned, in 2017. And at the same time, there was a lot of change. We have a new administration, and so there's been a lot of changes within the district in that time. Being a person who'd been really involved with the budget process, that was very close to my heart when it came time to work on the budget the first time in 2018. And there were challenges, many of which were due to the fact that there was new administration, but I found myself scratching my head when we were getting budget information the same day of the meeting, and when the budget information that was provided didn't have adequate detail to really be able to compare it to the formal budget documents that we would formally adopt. So I noted those things in 2018. And then hoped in 2019 to see a bit more detail and to be able to have that information provided with enough notice so that the public could be adequately involved. In 2019, our budget process was, to be frank, incredibly frustrating. So the board had adopted a budget plan, a very rough strategic plan that had some rough numbers attached to it. And so typically what happens, just to back up, typically the schools will say, okay, we had this much money in our operating budget. Next year, we want to have this much more to buy this, this, and this, and this, or to hire these people. And that is when we say what our needs are. And then typically the city would come back and say, okay, you're not going to get quite that much. Maybe you'll get this, or you'll get nothing. And so then the school board moves into the second part of, okay, well, how are we going to address those needs? Are we going to either, reduce the number of needs that we had allocated, perhaps put those off to a subsequent year, or are we going to try to cut something from the existing budget? So what happened in 2019 is the administration put forth what the needs were, and at the same time said, these are all the cuts that we want to make. And so where that conversation in the early budgeting process is typically dominated by, understanding fully what those needs are and ensuring the public understands them. Unfortunately, we were really talking about cuts the entire time. And it was particularly of concern to me because those cuts were jobs. Those were positions, and quite a few of them, several $1 million worth of positions that were slated to be cut. And so at meeting after meeting, I expressed concern because not only were we talking about cuts, but we weren't talking about cuts publicly. So what the administration, provided these very top level rough budget documents that had a number attached for cuts. And then we were asked to then discuss the specific cuts in closed session. And I, meeting after meeting was really, frankly, appalled that that this was the process that the board was going to collectively take. And I tried every avenue to stop this from happening. I at one point quoted Megan and read an article, when another board was talking about not wanting to share information about a principal, I believe, that had been who's had been let go in an adjacent county, and read and said, look, it's not that you have to do this, it's that you can, and so we can't say that we can't. So essentially, we were talking about cutting positions. This had nothing to do with the performance of the people in the jobs. And I'd say, hey, but the public deserves to know that we're talking about cutting these jobs. And I was told, well, we don't want these people to feel like they've got to beg for their jobs. So we don't want to, that would be embarrassing. Then I found out that in, I believe it was 2010, the board at that time was looking to make some cuts. And I dug into our board docs and found meeting minutes where the positions were listed. It was the same legal team that was advising the school board at that time. Even our board chair served on the board at the same time. And still, even when I shared those documents, I was told that we were not allowed essentially to let people know. So that culminated into the meeting where we were then set to adopt the budget. And I had been pushing for more documentation. And then finally, the documentation was shared, but it was shared to the board in the executive section of board docs, which is essentially where private materials are posted just for board members. Typically, personnel actions are posted there so that the board can adopt the new hires and cuts and changes that are made at a meeting. So it seemed rather unprecedented to me that an actual budget document had been shared there. So at the meeting, I was, it was scary, but what I chose to do was essentially to speak directly to the public and say, look, I'm sorry that I have access to a document that you don't have access to. And so I, referenced some of the details that were in the budget document that we had. And I believe what happened was then the paper, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, submitted a FOIA to get that budget document. And, or actually, I think they first asked for the document and they were told that they needed to FOIA it. And so there was some public, the public expressed concern, and then the budget document was shared. But of course, it was too late. And there were true repercussions from that. what some of the positions that were cut in that budget process were our attendance officers. All of the attendance officers, there were 20 positions that are the guys and women that were kind of out in the community knocking on doors to try to ensure that our kids were in school. Those positions were replaced by some higher paid desk jobs, essentially. And in the subsequent year, we saw a significant increase in truancy in the schools. And it's unfortunate because the public never really had an opportunity to say, yes, this is okay, or no, it's not. Thankfully, in our more recent budget process, we then we added those positions back in. So 2019 was, I think, a really eye-opening year for me in terms of transparency. I submitted a kind of request of a number of items, which I called, good governance items, and was able to make some traction on many of those. And one of the things that I like about being able to advocate for transparency is that it doesn't sound good if you don't go along with it, So I have been able to get some things changed because it's just common sense. So some of the things that I've asked for is to formalize, when we're getting documents before meetings. So the language in our policy was somewhat vague. It said 3 days rather than 3 working days. So I was able to change the language just to add the word working in so that we are giving the public more ability to be able to see what it is that we're going to be talking about and to read what the materials are that go with it. I requested too that in our reporting of the log, essentially the log of all of the FOIA requests that come in, that we also publish the costs that are associated with the requests, because unfortunately the costs can be quite high, and that can negate the ability for the public to be able to get access to information. I pushed to have all of our meetings live streamed. That was something we began doing before COVID, and I'm proud of that because it did we've seen a lot of more engagement from parents and family members and staff in our board meetings, particularly around the rezoning time, and now when we're seeing views of our Facebook streams of in the tens of thousands. So I think engagement in what's going on has really surged. Another thing that I'm a stickler about is the language that we're using in our agenda items. And I know that might sound like a minor thing, but what can happen is so if we're voting on, or we're going to have a discussion about, say, alternative education, but then if the agenda item is called culture and climate, yes, that may technically be where it falls under, but then, if the public is looking for information and it's embedded in something where it's not clear, it can be difficult to kind of keep track of those documents. So using consistent language and having dedicated agenda items for each discussion. So, sometimes I'll want to add something to a discussion and I'll be told, oh, well, we can just cover it under this. I generally push back on that because I think it's important that we are clearly identifying what each discussion item is. I served as the chair of our governance, or the committee that works and oversees our lobbying efforts. So we have a lobbyist that we work with during General Assembly each year. And so in that process, the board takes various positions on many things, whether it be, what is going to be our position on vouchers, or what is the state going to address issues like teacher retention. And so the board will take positions on those things so that our team knows, kind of which way to kind of push those legislators. And so this year I was able to request that we also take a position as a board on transparency. And so the language that we adopted in that position document was RPS supports policies to enhance transparency in the governance process overall. This includes revisions to existing FOIA laws to improve information access and engagement of family and community members in the governance of our schools, as well as policies to ensure public input and visibility in using private funding streams for public programs. And I haven't spoken about the kind of private dollars, but that is of considerable importance because we are seeing, an increasingly substantial amount of funds being used or being given to the district by private entities. And I understand that if they're private dollars, they're not tax dollars, but this is a public school system, and I think it's important for the public to know how those dollars are being used, and to ensure that that private interests are not overstepping their role in the in identifying how the schools are going to be managed and run and executed. So I am always eager to hear what are the things that are happening at the state, and hope that that we can tighten up our FOIA laws. It's something that people have often said that Virginia lags a bit in terms of our official state language, but it is of critical importance because I think that our country is stronger because of the people who sit at home and are keeping track of what's going on, the people that are doing their homework. And they can't do their homework if they can't get access to information. And I know that ultimately it's not just about the law, it's about the people, and people just ultimately having the fortitude to simply do the right thing. But regardless, having those laws in place certainly can't hurt. And I can say for myself, being able to point to our internal policy and say, hey, it says in our policy, we're supposed to get a budget document that's broken down in this way. That was certainly helpful in my ability to ensure that that is done. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kenya. Are there any questions from the audience? And if you want to type it into the Q&A box for Kenya. Kenya, we talked in the previous panel about, holding meetings during this time. How has this changed, or has it changed the dynamic among board members or their expectations or observations about public participation?
Yes. So as a board member, I was frustrated that it took so long before we moved our meetings virtual. So essentially what happened was, the schools were closed and we didn't meet for a while. And so we really lost a lot of time to continue our work, especially given the fact that this was a time when there was so much more work to be doing. So it took a while before meetings continued, which I think was a loss. And so what I think the good thing is that, as I mentioned, we're seeing more engagement that's happening. However, what I'm also noting is that I think there's an understanding that that public comment and that input is a powerful thing. And so, now that the public has an easier ability to be able to write in and have that comment shared, rather than having to go downtown and park and, try to figure out, well, who's going to be home with my kids and making them dinner. We're seeing more comments come in now than before. I think that some comments that are coming in are coming in, sometimes from the encouragement of internal folks. And so, when that's the case, then it's hard to identify, well, which are the public comments that are kind of self-motivated and which are not. And unfortunately, what I've seen happen is because if there is an abundance of comments that are coming in, you know, both from kind of internal folks and from the public, well, then the public's comments are essentially kind of pushed out, because then we'll put limits in terms of the amount of time that we'll read them. So, you know, then we'll only read, you know, 1 minute of comment. And I think that's unfortunate, because the public is putting the time in, and they are paying attention. So I think that, you know, what I've noticed is that engagement has gone up quite a bit. I think that, you know, the meetings are certainly lasting as long as they did before. And in terms of the dynamic between board colleagues, I don't know that that has really changed as much. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, I think that, you know, ultimately folks are still, you know, pushing and advocating and doing the work that we did before. But definitely with the understanding that more people are watching and paying attention. And I think ultimately that's a good thing.
All right. Thanks. If you don't mind hanging out for just a few more minutes, I have a couple of poll questions I wanted to launch, just to see how many have watched a local government meeting online since we moved into this time. And then I'm going to ask another question related to that following up. So, well, still lots of folks who haven't yet responded, but so far the weight is definitely towards having watched a local government meeting since we went on, or school board meeting since we went online. I know that I have. I found one of the, I've had a person who has called me a number of times over the past couple of months over a small town in Southwest Virginia. And I was having a kind of a hard time understanding some of the dynamics that she was talking about. So I've been able to go to Facebook and YouTube and watch these meetings that I might not have gone to see otherwise. And now I have a much better understanding of what she was talking about, as well as just watching how people are struggling. Everybody's struggling with trying to conduct the meetings and with trying to follow the meetings and trying to prepare, respond and participate in the meetings. And so it was all, it's been helpful for me. Okay, so my other question then is, if you've gone to one, have you offered public comment? Let's see. And only about half people participating so far, and overwhelmingly no, neither virtually nor in person. So what we're seeing, we talked about in our very first panel about the General Assembly, is that they've moved to virtual public comment, and a lot of there was a little there was some growing pains there at the beginning, but now they seem to have gotten the system down pretty good in terms of letting people in to the poll, to the comment period. So Kenya, I'm sorry, are there some other things you would like to add, or some final thoughts or encouragements you might offer us?
It looks like there is one question in the chat that I could answer.
Okay, yes, I didn't see that.
Yeah, do you think that people are more engaged in local government during this time? If so, do you think it's because people are home or recent civil unrest? Also, do you think this online access will continue after COVID? And I absolutely think that people are more engaged. I'm also involved, a part of a local advocacy group, Richmond for All, and it's a new group, and membership has really surged in a very short amount of time, which I think is testament to the fact that people are really eager to see change happen. And you know, I think that in Richmond, where we've seen there's been a discussion about those monuments and what to do with them over such a long period of time, that to now see a very divisive decision made in that has been empowering for advocates who are seeing change happen, and that certainly is a really strong incentive to wanting to stay involved. So I think that the reason why we're seeing more people engaged are, kind of all of the reasons. I think, the fact that we can participate at home is certainly a big part of it. And I think that the kinds of things that we're talking about right now, so when we were working on our rezoning work, we would see, engagement of a meeting of about, like a video would get like, I don't know, 5,000 views. And obviously that's a topic where, it's one that people are often wanting to keep track of, because that would be a significant change for families. Now, as we were discussing, whether or not to go virtual, those board meetings had views in Facebook of like, nearly 20,000. So I think that viewership is a combination of knowing that this is something that's going to have a very tangible impact on my life, and so whether you're staff or parent, you're eager to find out what's going to happen. And then I think then what happens after that is then, and I could say this for myself as an advocate, it becomes a bit of a routine. And once you begin going to those meetings on Monday evenings, and you kind of can see, wow, these are some important discussions to have, and wanting to keep track, then it can become a kind of routine that I do think and hope that people will continue. I know, I think as it pertains to online access, and I personally don't see it going away. I think that would, again, as I mentioned, I think the thing with transparency is, again, it's difficult for folks to say no to. And so I don't really know that there is a way, once you've been allowing people to have more access, to say, no, now you've got to come in person. I politically, that just doesn't seem like plausible to happen. And I can certainly say, in my work as a board, I certainly wouldn't encourage that. We need to be figuring out ways to get more people involved, and my hope is too that as more families have access to digital devices, now that we're handing out laptops and hotspots, that we'll see those numbers continue to increase. My work as I try to really stay attuned to what the community is asking for, and the more that the folks I seek to help are showing up, the better I'm able to do my part and vote in a way that reflects their needs.
Okay, thanks. There was, I don't know if you can handle this in 2 minutes, but Joe Fuentes asked how receptive other board members were to your efforts. Did we have a freeze out here? Looks like Kenya has frozen up. So, well, thank you. Thank you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes. Now we do.
Okay, well, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about, I'm not sure if that froze up on just my end or if it also was on the public feed, but I do apologize to the audience and to Kenya for that fading out like that, freezing up like that. So I really appreciate Kenya coming in to talk.